And welcome to another episode of Gopher Gridiron Radio in the new era that is the gophergazette.com. We are on launch day here, July 1st, and it's been a lot going on over on Minnesota 247. So we have now switched officially from Gopher Illustrated to Gopher Gazette. I've written a lot about it. You should head on over there to see what the changes are. But for those of you who want the too long, didn't read, or in this case, didn't listen, in an era of, I would say, Gophers coverage, especially here locally, that appears to be shrinking, I'm now taking over and I'm putting my money where my mouth is and we're expanding. So that's where we have added some help to the basketball side of things to boost up our basketball coverage and hiring Dan Owen as a new paid staff writer. And I know that he is a very good friend of our guest on the podcast today. But before we get into that, Dan is going to be helping on the Nico Medved men's basketball side of things. But also, I think it's about time that we get some consistent women's basketball coverage as well. And that's where Dan was able to earn some time with everyone's favorite Sweet 16 coach, Don Plitzawhite. And those two went in depth on a part one that is, again, live on Gopher Gazette. And for those of you listening to this, thinking to yourself, well, boy, that sounds like a good time to join. Do you got a deal going on so I can justify this to my significant other in a time where everybody's budget is a little tighter? I do. It is 75% off a new annual VIP subscription over there to join our outstanding elite message board community. You get to read everything across the 247 Sports Network. You get to communicate with myself, Ryan James, Dan Owen on a daily basis there. So that's 35 bucks for the entire year. So what we can show you that this consistent Gophers coverage is going to be something that you want to invest in. Now that I got my shameless plug out of the way, that's where we get into the nitty gritty that is summer splash recruiting. And there is no one I can think of better in my life that I would want to talk about than the deer magnet himself who lives in Northwest Wisconsin. And that is gopherguru.com. Daniel House, as a lovely, lovely subscriber myself, I have been reading all about this Gopher 2027 recruiting class from you. You and I know the names better than anyone else. But how is life for you in Wisconsin as we approach the 4th of July, Mr. House?
Lindsay, first off, congrats. Excited about the changes coming to 24/7.
Yeah.
People need to know the work that's put in our market for content. It's remarkable. Everyone's hustling and grinding. Burnsy's putting in the work. And when you can support local content, I mean, if you want to read about the teams you love
Hmm.
and get next gen type of coverage, support the work, support our people, and do it locally because it's important. I think. I just want
Well,
to get that message out there.
well, I love that for you. Before I give you an opportunity to plug gopherguru.com, the last thing I want to do is also say, if you're listening to us and you've always thought to yourself, I wonder what Ryan Burns and Daniel House actually look like consistently. Well, unfortunately for you, you're going to hear the same joke because outside of my wife, there's no one in my life that thinks that I don't have a face for radio. And guess what? You can watch us now on YouTube as every episode
Oh
will
man.
be posted to the Gopher Gazette YouTube page. So if you're someone who prefers to consume your content video wise, because here's what I've learned through Marriage House is my wife is, and look, I love her dearly. We have now been married, I don't know how long, I think 3, 4 years, but we've been together now over a decade. Is she will only consume podcasts on YouTube, which is so ironic because she doesn't watch it.
Yep.
Now, I don't quite understand how it all works in her brain, but it makes sense for her. So I knew that we were lacking in the video game. People also want to be able to see us. So unfortunately for you, House, or fortunately, look, I think you're a handsome lad, so everybody gets to see your mug. But we're now on the YouTube game, baby.
We're on the YouTube game. It's where the content's going. So I'm excited about it. It's gonna be great.
All right. So what we're here to do today is look, we could be here for 2 hours, and I think some of you would enjoy that if we got into the nitty gritty of all 29. Yes, you heard that correctly. All 29 go for football commits in this 2027 recruiting class. I will tell you with the utmost peace and love, I would probably not enjoy getting into the minutia of every single high schooler. But what we are here to do today is try and give you the most comprehensive overview of what happened here over the last 6 weeks, because this class has really expanded, I would say, since probably, for being honest, House, early April to where we are today, where they started hot. And I think they're, at least Minnesota, I think at least was sitting with one of the biggest volume classes in the high school ranks. At least, again, 29 commits in the transfer portal era is an incredible number. But before I give my thoughts and feelings on that, what are your overall view, or what is your overall view here of the 2027 class here so far?
Yeah, I feel like they've really prioritized traits at specific positions,
Yeah.
length being one on the offensive line, especially arm length, long developmental profiles at that position. Safety, I'd say a lot of different skill sets, guys that can do different things, playing in the deep half, being able to play single high, work over the slot. So safety has some different skill set profiles. Tight end, with Baco and Mickelson, more flex tight ends in high school that'll develop more versatility in the passing game when they're able to, gain additional strength. And I'd say the big one, Bernsey, is at receiver. It's more of that basketball team mindset where you kind of got a power forward, center, point guard, the combo guard, different types of length and size, skill set profiles for the wide receivers. Something that clearly Isaac Frichte has prioritized early on in his tenure here as wide receivers coach.
Yeah, there's a lot to get into with all those statements here, and I'm excited to do so. And I also think it's important to start with saying there's a lot of college football coaches in 2026 here that say a lot of words that don't actually back up their actions. And I know that PJ Fleck gets that stereotype, especially if you haven't been in this market with him for 10 years. But one of the things that he has stressed to us here in the local media, especially in recent years, House, is that he wants to build this team from the high school ranks. And that's where you look at their last class. I mean, they had 25 plus guys that they signed in it then. You look at this current recruiting class that almost has 30 guys in it. It's one of those
Hmm.
things where my father taught me as I was growing up that I hear what you say and I trust what you do. I've said it on this podcast for Lord knows how many years, and I'm sure many of you are tired of me saying it. But I also just, if you're going to say something, do it. And that's what Fleck has done, is that he's backing up his actions. That, and I agree with him, and why it's important, House. And I want you to see, I want to get your thoughts on this statement I want to put to you, is for a school like the University of Minnesota that makes the decision to not spend a lot of money in high school recruiting relative to other Big Ten teams, where I know that our 24/7 sports folks were out at the opening. For those of you who don't know what the opening is, it's this big hoopla event out in Oregon. All the top players in the country end up going out there, especially quarterback wise. And they did an anonymous recruit survey of all these high profile recruits. And to see some of the numbers that some of these guys have agreed to already, where, look, I'm not here to shame them, but if there are schools, House, that were offering millions of dollars per year on 3-year deals to 16, 17-year olds, I cannot fathom for the life of me doing such. But if you have the money to do it, I suppose do it. But for a class, here's again, I know I'm getting very tangent here, but my statement to you is, for the way that they want to build this thing, high school ranks, where the ceiling swings are, and I think if this would bear out as you go back through PJ Fleck NFL draft picks, a lot of them come from the high school ranks. And then I think that's what Fleck has figured out is portal, for what Minnesota's budget is. Portal guys, you fix holes. High school guys, we're swinging for home runs here. Do you agree or disagree?
Yeah, I think now, you look at the high school landscape with 5 for 5 coming into play here. That changes a little bit of the calculus in terms of like your risk tolerance on certain players you take, knowing that, hey, you got to start to get an impact from this player, maybe faster, into that second year, you got to start seeing something from the player. So I do think it's going to impact roster building strategy in terms of developmental players. How risky do you want to be? And then your evaluation has to be very good now. I mean, especially if you're going to do a lot in the high school recruiting ranks, of course, you're not going to be perfect. But I mean, if you want to really build a dynamic team that's got depth, you're going to have to nail some guys that are maybe slipping under through the cracks or under identified players that can come in and make an impact. And then you kind of got to balance it out in terms of which positions translate the fastest in high school recruiting. Is it skill guys? Where do you find that balance of like trench players? Which ones can translate faster, and what type of physical profiles do they have? So now I think the strategy component of how you build your team and the way you evaluate becomes pretty important, especially for schools like Minnesota that are more high school recruiting heavy.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a fascinating mix, and it's one that I wish we could get into with someone like Garrett Chernoff, who is the general manager, or maybe more specifically with the director of player personnel here, Marcus Hendrickson. And maybe that'll one day be an episode that you and I can get into the nitty gritty and the weeds with those guys of how do you go about building it when you don't have the budget that a Nebraska has, that you don't have the budget that apparently UCLA now has, because that was one of the schools that one of the questions that was posed to these high profile recruits out at the opening was, who offered you the most money? And UCLA was mentioned by multiple players, which they didn't have that money under the previous regime. Now, I would ask you, how do they still have money considering the athletic department? But that's for a completely different podcast. So, as we get into the start of this 27 recruiting class, I know everybody wants us to start at one position, and that would be quarterback. And that's where it is I think, fascinating mix for Greg Harbaugh, because you have the unknown that is Furion Ferreira, who is a California quarterback. And why he is the unknown is the young man just hasn't played football. And what do I mean by that? Well, his recruiting story is an interesting one where he picks up all these offers house prior to him really having any game tape. He commits to Boston College last summer, or I think the spring of 2025. The Gophers get him on campus um, last summer. They're able to see him and they get him committed. He's supposed to be competing for the starting quarterback position with Ryan Hopkins out at Mater Dei. He ends up tearing his knee in September. I think he has attempted at the high school ranks at a varsity level less than 50 passes. Now, you and I have been able to see Furion and Ferrer live as he attended a Gopher camp here just in the last few weeks. So, with Furion specifically, what stands out to you?
Yeah, I mean, being able to push the ball downfield and, rip it at all three levels, I think that was kind of the apparent takeaway. I think, like you say, he looks like a guy that maybe hasn't played as much, that like the fundamental piece, like Greg's going to need to get his hands on him and like coach up all that raw ability. But you see like the flashes of throw here, throw there, where it's like he's able to kind of, make all the necessary throws in the system. But I do think it's like, footwork, varying the pace of throw, understanding the type of throw you need for the specific route type. Like those things will come with more playing time. So I feel like Minnesota's betting on the fact that they see flashes and
Mhm.
they see the ability. Now it's all about, maybe this guy was a little bit under recruited because of the lower sample size. Other teams were looking for guys with, more production, but then, he's coming off the injury as well too. So he's still kind of working his way back from that. But I think this is like an upside bet. And being at Mater Dei, being in a program that is, high profile, has a very, diverse offensive system that allowed him to, even though he didn't have the reps, he's working in practice in an
Mhm.
offensive system that can help him translate to the college level. So I think they're going to kind of lean on, the development piece with him and hope that maybe he's a little bit underrated in a sense.
And that's where, for his senior year, he is transferred now to Mission Hills High School. If you want to search him on the X machine, you're able to see some of his 7-on-7 stuff. Like I think throwing on air, that's about as good physically as you can look. From what I've seen, from the clips I've seen, he's 6'2.5" plus. I think he's pretty athletic. It's just for him, and he is the lowest rated guy according to 24/7 Sports in this class. I don't disagree with that necessarily right now because he just hasn't played. Now, if we get into October and we got 6 games worth of tape and it
Yeah.
looks like if the tape matches the physical skill set, I mean, he's going to rise very, very quickly in my mind. But the skill set is certainly there for Minnesota to have an impact quarterback down the line here. Now, the other guy in the class is a local kid from Moorhead, one of the Moorhead kids here. Again, go Moorhead Spuds. If you're a Gopher fan, you're going to be tuning in to every single Moorhead Spuds game up on sure WDAY or whatever it's going to be at this point this fall. But Jet Feeney is the other quarterback in this class who has been one of the most prolific passers over the last couple of years. When he was healthy, Moorhead was a completely different team last fall. That's why they ended up in the state title game. But Jet Feeney now, because I think of Jet Feeney back when he was a sophomore, I think.
Hmm.
Again, to me, that's when he got on my radar. Jet Feeney's over 6'2" now. And I was on Instagram yesterday and he posted a clip. I mean, he's two-hand dunking behind his head. I think he's bigger and more athletic than what people give him credit for. But when you watch Jet Feeney and from what you've seen, what stands out?
Yeah, I think that you kind of went right where I was thinking of going here. Like the play extension skills on the move are kind
Mhm.
of are one of the traits that stand out. I mean, he's capable of scrambling, picking up yards as needed. I think the quick and intermediate game, having that quick release to get the ball out with anticipation, working, the middle of the field, back end line red zone throws. And the system that they run is very passing centric, built around RPO and play action, moving the pocket. So, I think he's got some upside. He's a tough player too. He stands in there. He'll take some hits and get rid
Mhm.
of the ball. But I think that, Minnesota here is looking at in-state guy who, like you say, is, getting bigger, getting more developed and showing some athleticism. So I think that, you look at Jet Feeney, we'll kind of see where he's at with his tape this year. I think that tape of the last year of high school ball is so telling because I think guys can make a huge leap between the junior and senior.
Yeah, I mean, I think senior year is the most important data point in this whole thing. And I've talked to coaches at the Big Ten level, at the Mountain West level, and the Missouri Valley level, at the MIAC level, whatever it may be, that the senior, while recruiting continues to accelerate earlier and earlier and earlier,
Yeah.
it's still the most important data point is how do you actually look when the pads are on for your senior year? Because House and I'll tell you, I call them the underwear Olympics, which are camps or different things where you're just moving around out there. You're doing 40 short shuttle. I mean, that is still a data point. You still
Hmm.
have to be big enough, long enough, fast enough. But your tape is ultimately your tape, and that's what's going to be playing on Saturday. So it's still one of the most fascinating data points there. Now, when you get to running back, again, we start up in Moorhead, you have Tay Rich, and then you go down to Mississippi to get not Greg Harbaugh, but Greg
Greg Hargrove.
Hargrove. Now, one of the things I would tell you that I think they've certainly targeted here with Mo in his first year as the running back coach is they want pass catchers at tailback because that is something that Hargrove and that Rich display on their tape. But when you watched both of them, what stands out to you?
Yeah, I think the receiving ability is one of them. Swing passes, wheel and arrow routes, getting them flexed out, just getting the ball in space. When I watched a lot of the tape on Hargrove, I thought, he's a real slippery runner. Sudden in the return game, making that sharp jump cut and then kind of accelerating downhill. He's a little smaller, sudden type of back out on the perimeter. I think he gives them a little bit of a different type of skill set. And then I thought with Reich, he did a really good job like pressing block and then kind of letting stuff set up and finding the cutback. He's got a very patient running style. I'd say the versatility is definitely a component that Mo's looking for. And you watch Greg's offense, they really want to be able to, get the running back involved in the passing game, whether it's through check downs,
Mhm.
going empty and having the back out wide, have the back out wide, motion back in, trying to gather information and create matchups. So I think that's something clearly that Minnesota's valued with the running backs here.
Yeah, that's where Rich is probably the most intriguing of the four to me of Moorhead commits. And why I say that is I think his workout stuff outside of his game tape shows me that there's more upside there. What do I mean by that? I mean, he's a part of Midwest Team USA for baseball. I know he's a great baseball player. I've talked to coaches outside of the Gopher staff who have watched him work out up there and would tell you he might be the best athlete of the four of them. And that considers Zach Walker, who we'll get to a little bit later, is one of the best track athletes in the state. So the question I have for Tay this fall is, does that athleticism that is seen in workouts begin to translate more and more to the football field? Now, I'm not saying that the tape isn't good. There's a reason why he's committed to a Big Ten institution right now. But that is one of the things that I am going to be keeping an eye on in September while I'm watching these Moorhead Spud games is when Jet Feeney actually does hand the ball off, because that offense is just going to be insanely gaudy. How does Tay look in terms of making men miss? How does he look in terms of, again, turning a 10-yard run into a 70-yard touchdown? Different things of that nature. Now, when we get to Isaac Frichty's receiver room here, they're loading up, baby. They took 4 high school receivers, and the shortest guy, House, is 6 foot flat. So
Hmm.
I'll give you the names here and I'll let you go from there. You've got another Moorhead Spud, and who was the most productive receiver in the state of Minnesota last year, in David Mack. You've got Jaden Thomas from Las Vegas Centennial. You've got Kevin Ferrygood from Cy-Fair High School down in Cypress, Texas. And then Carlos Ferguson from Maryland, a 6'4" receiver. So what stands out to you about what Isaac Frichty wanted to do in his first shot to kind of turn over his receiver room?
It's pretty clear Minnesota wants to have more versatility in the passing game, having different skill sets that they can move around to create good matchups. And so, like you said, having bigger body types is one of the ways to do that. You know, it kind of meshes in with the tight end position too, that they want to have guys that they can move into different formations to make it tougher for the defense to, make decisions, keep the defense constantly guessing with more personnel grouping variety. Ferguson's a bigger target, like you said, at 6'4", one of those bigger X type of guys, but also could maybe be a power slot type of player. I thought Ferrygood was really good in the yak component, being able to stay on his feet, make plays after the catch, working the middle of the field. Thomas from Las Vegas, I think he's more of a gadget guy in space, get him the ball, let him make plays. David Mack, saw him live. I thought he was someone that, within the initial aspect of the release, able to run a lot of different routes and create natural separation. I think there's some intriguing elements in his game, just how he moves, and he's got pretty good hands. So I'm curious to see, what the next step looks like for him once he kind of gets in the program, develops physically, and gets some more technical refinement. It's clear that they wanted to add more variety to the receiver room from a skill set standpoint.
Yeah, you look at what they've done even in the last, let's include the 26 recruiting class, where you think about a guy like Braden Stevens. Okay. Braden
Yeah.
Stevens, why do you take Braden Stevens from Kansas City when he's 5'8"? Because he's got 10-3 speed. Because you want to target the trait of speed. You look at what they've done here in the 27 class. What is an area that, at least on this podcast, that you and I have talked about endlessly over the last 24 months is how Gopher receivers had 50-50 balls become, at points last year, 35-65 balls. Now, you need the adequate size, which they do have now in Carlos Ferguson and Kevin Ferrygood. Again, you're targeting guys that can go up and win at the back pylon, or if it's 2nd and 8 and you want the quarterback to throw a fade, well, he's got to go be able to grab it off the noggin of a corner. You've got the adequate size and length there. You look at a guy like Jaden Thomas. He's got the speed and acceleration. You watch his tape, you watch the way he's able to run away from guys right there. And then David Mack, to me, he's a guy that if it hits, is going to be someone like Daniel Jackson to me, where he's not the biggest guy, House. He's not the fastest guy. He's not the most explosive guy necessarily, but you know what he does an outstanding job of? Running routes and getting the F open, which I
Hmm.
think there's so obviously so much value to that, because at the end of the day, what is the receiver's job? To win his route. You can do it in a lot of different ways. You can be really long, really tall, really fast, whatever it may be. But if you just know how to get open, like David Mack does, and then catch the football,
Hmm.
I mean, there is so much value in that. So I think it's very intriguing that Isaac clearly has a plan, because he's now worked with what Minnesota has on roster for 6 months. So he knows what this room needs. And it's clear to me, House, that what he thought was, we need to get bigger and we need to have guys that have specific traits of if they hit, how do they win? Well, this is how they win.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that they're looking for more schematic possibility too, from
Yeah.
Greg's standpoint of being able to create different looks and packages. And week to week, you might see a team that struggles with that type of link. There are smaller defensive back rooms. You're able to get matchups for your bigger targets. I just think that Minnesota now is kind of trying to figure out how to adjust to their personnel to maybe match up with the type of scheme that they're playing because they were kind of that RPO based team. Now they've gotten into that more pro style offense. So now your personnel, you need different types of players. You look at Shanahan's offense, for example, think about all the different body types. Juwan Jennings is a perfect example of a bigger guy. It's now with the Vikings, but he's that skill set that they, constantly were moving around to create matchups for. So Minnesota wants that type of diversity in the room.
Now, when we transition to the college tight ends here, Eric Kaler had himself a class where if you look at the two highest rated guys, they both are tight ends. And so we are soon to be a 14 personnel offense with Roman Voss. You're also going to be adding into the mix a 4-star from South Dakota by the name of Drake Mickelson from Lennox. And then you've also got from everyone's favorite North Dakota high school, if you're a Gopher fan, Kindred, North Dakota in Brooks Baco. Now, you and I were able to see Drake Mickelson and Brooks Baco live last summer, 12 months ago,
Hmm.
when Kaler got them down to some Gopher camps. Now, I know I've got some strong thoughts and feelings here, but when you look at the future of this Gopher tight end room, and you can include Roman Voss, Gabe Weaver, guys like that too, what gets you excited?
I'd say just the idea of versatility, being able to play guys from different alignments. Some of those players have different strengths from various spots. So, you're constantly making the defense have to adjust to the grouping that you're deploying. So, I mean, you can go two tight end, you could play, one of these guys in the slot as more like a power slot. You look at like studying Michigan heading into the season, they had a JJ Buchanan who kind of came in as a tight end, but then they changed his designation to receiver, and he's more of that like tight end receiver hybrid type of guy. Denarian Bonner, guy at Nebraska, similar type of skill set. So you look at kind of what teams are doing in roster building. They want to have different types of tight ends that they can use, not just the blocking component. Yeah, that's always going to be important, but guys who can create mismatches in the passing game. So you look at these two and Baco and Mickelson,
Mm-hmm.
right now they're flex tight ends. So they're going to have to get a little bit stronger while maintaining the movement skills and the body control that I think are two, exemplary traits within the game, moving like receivers, but having that tight end frame. Now you're going to have to get the weight added on, and Kaler's going to have to unlock those traits fundamentally. But, Minnesota's clearly trying to invest in the tight end room. And then we didn't even talk about like the matchup thing for the defense.
Correct.
When you got two tight ends out on the field, does a team have a 6'3", nickel corner that's big enough to be able to fit the run so you can stay in nickel, or do you have, a linebacker on the field? So I think grouping wise, it helps you in that respect too.
I mean, that is the most important thing that I think people, if you really want to get into the weeds, 201, 301 level stuff, which is what House is essentially alluding to, is you want to target tight ends that are like, say, Brevin Spanford. And that's what Brooks Baco, Drake Mickelson, Roman Voss are, where they can kill you as a receiver, but they also can get you as a run blocker, which can put your defense in personnel packages where, to House's point, if you're in two tight ends, you're probably going to have in the Big Ten a third linebacker on the field. Well, can that 6'2", 6'4" Sam linebacker at 240 pounds, can he cover this guy in space compared to if you're just in one tight end, then you can have a safety or somebody else who's maybe more agile to do so. You want to create as many mismatches as possible, which the only question I have for you, House, because I know that I've seen the discourse online here, and I think our listeners would be intrigued to hear your thoughts on this, is I've seen a lot of the NFL guys, some of the smartest minds that I believe in the NFL, have talked a lot about how tight end usage is increasing in the NFL.
Hmm.
Now, I'm sure you've seen the discourse, but if you had to get it down to that 101 level for the listeners here, why is it that the NFL is leaning so much more into the tight ends, which in turn is going to influence the highest levels of college football, which your Golden Gophers are at in the Big Ten.
Well, you look at the craze in the NFL there for a while was, the passing game and, vertical passing. So defenses countered playing more too high shell type of defenses. So, you have opportunities to run into lighter boxes and, teams are going, okay, they're taking away the big play. Now you're going to pivot and run the football a little bit more, get back to the run game, heavier groupings, two tight ends, multiple tight ends. You look at what Seattle did in their run to the Super Bowl. They played a lot of diverse personnel groupings, multi tight ends. Their passing efficiency jumped up significantly when they were in those type of packages. So I think it's more of an adjustment. Like you go through these ebbs and flows when you watch football, every level. Like defenses will do something, offenses will adjust. Offenses will do something, defenses will adjust. And maybe it's 2 to 3 year periods where there's waves, but I think that's kind of a response to defenses getting smaller, sub package heavy. They're like, okay, now you're going to have to be able to have guys on the field that can play the run and then also be able to match up against tight ends. So I think that is something that is definitely change the way teams are building their rosters in the NFL. Look at how many tight ends were drafted, record number of tight ends.
Mhm.
So how does that apply now to the college football game? I think that there's some opportunities there for teams that are building rosters to do some cool stuff and really make it hard on teams that
See,
they're
this is
playing.
why I love you, House. Is the way that you're able to convey it is for simple football minded folks like myself a lot easier to digest. And at my old age, that's one of the most important things. You'll learn that as you get older. But to kind of get back to these two tight ends, and to me, Brooks Baco, I'm going to say this with the utmost peace and love to the pride of Jackson County Central, who I think is going to be a very good player in Roman Voss. I like Brooks Baco slightly more. Now, again, that's not meant as a slight to Roman Voss, but Brooks Baco to me just checks every possible box that you could think of for how the tight end has evolved in the college ranks. He is legitimately 6'5". He is an outstanding 50-50 ball winner. He is the literal reigning Gatorade player of the year. If you've ever watched him play basketball, my man could have definitely gone and played probably mid-major Division 1 basketball if he would have wanted. The athleticism is effortless. And I remember watching him at that Gopher camp catch passes. It's not like some tight ends you've watched over the year where they are like crossing their eyes because they're concentrating so hard to catch the football. It comes very effortlessly for Brooks. Now, for Brooks, it's going to be how do you get from 210 pounds to 240 pounds while maintaining that athleticism, maintaining that speed, that mismatch ability. And then again, I'm not trying to slight Mickelson at all, who is one of the best 400-meter runners also in South Dakota. The athleticism is very evident with the both of them. And it's clear that that's what Eric Kaler was trying to get was with the college game and the NFL game so intertwined now, everyone wants to get more athletic. And then they have done, I think they've done a very good job of that here in the last couple of classes. But to me, Baco, I don't know. And for tight ends, it's so difficult to play early on because you need to be able to help in the run game. And that's where you just need to be stronger. And again, that's going to be up on Baco here over the next 12, 13 months before he joins. But the easy athleticism for me with Brooks Baco to go with a legitimate 6'5" frame. I mean, I think he has a ceiling just like Roman Voss does to be that Brevin Spanford / Max Williams type of pass catching tight end that so many people have been yearning for, House.
Well, yeah, and then you'll kind of look at positional value, Burnsy. I don't think people talk about that enough in the sense that, like, receivers are going to be more expensive. Do you lean more into the tight ends with the idea that, maybe
Yeah.
you can get a little bit of a discount from a positional value standpoint? It's all about development, though. It's not like the NFL where you can fire up the tape and you're like, okay, we've got, 4 or 5 years of college, film to look at to know whether
Mhm.
the guy's going to translate. Your evaluation, like we talked about earlier, has to be strong in the sense that, like, this player fits our scheme. Here's our vision for him from a strength and conditioning standpoint. Here's the type of role that we see for him. But I would say that with Baco, man, I think the frame definitely pop. The athletic profile, the ability, the movement skills, and all that. Like you say, it's about how it all comes together. Maintaining those movement skills and that body control, those traits that are hallmarks of his game while adding the weight. I think that'll be the storyline to watch.
All right, now let's shift to the Minnesota Moving Company up front, and that is going to be another big O line class, which I am always going to be among the mindset for a school like Minnesota because you get your ceiling swings in on, especially at a spot like the offensive line. Like you need to take a lot of guys in the high school ranks. Now, you don't want to take a guy to take a guy. And that's where I think Brian Callahan has done a good job of mixing where you look at this 5-man offensive line class. You've got Dylan Moda from St. Patrick High School in Chicago, Will Clausen from Cedar Rapids Prairie in Iowa, Joseph Hamer from Lakeville South, Drake Buth from Glenwood, and then Jamail Sewell from Wisconsin Lutheran in Milwaukee. The shortest guy that is verified height, from what I've been told behind the scenes, is over 6'5" among all five of these guys. So the days of taking 6'2" guys. Now, again, I'm not here to talk down about somebody like, say, John Michael Schmitz, who's on the shorter side, because Lord knows this program misses him at center, and they have now for 3 consecutive years. But when you look at this overall 5-man recruiting class, what are the things that you think Callahan, Greg Harbaugh, and this offensive staff said, you know what, we really need to target these areas with the guys we're going to take?
Well, they want guys with long arms and wingspans. That's definitely the takeaway. Big
So
frames.
let me stop you right there. Is one of the things that I would tell you among these guys, especially with guys like Sewell and Hamer, more than anything, is they have 34 plus inch arms. Now, I'm not asking you to be Mel Kiper, but I am asking you, why does it matter? Why does length in wingspan, and why is that something that you and I talk about constantly, which in turn college offensive line coaches and NFL offensive line coaches, why does length in wingspan matter so much on the offensive line?
Well, when you're able to fire your hands and get position, able to create extension, recovery as a pass protector too, when you're getting in your pass protection sets, you got to have a counter to all the freaky, explosive, athletic defensive ends that you're playing against on a weekly basis. So having the length gives you more, range of motion, surface area ability to like just create extension and, drive guys off the ball. So I think that's like the core trait that teams are looking for because they know it gives offensive linemen a little bit of an advantage when their technique is tight.
All right. So again, there's so many guys in this class, and I know that I love a nice tangent. So of these five guys, I want you to pick one and say, this guy, for these reasons, is why I'm intrigued that in 3 years, if it hits, everybody's going to be excited because my hill that I will also die on for a program like the University of Minnesota House is because you're not going to be able to afford the high level high school prospects, more or less, on the offensive line who just come in and are ready to play at day one. Every offensive and defensive lineman should be given 24 months to get adequately strong enough and have the foot speed to me. So when you look at this 5-man recruiting class, who is your guy amongst the five?
I like Hamer from Lakeville South. I think he's got good physicality and pad level already in the run game, being able to burst and fire off the ball, get underneath guys. I just think that like the frame jumps out, like just how he looks on film to me. I feel like he's someone that has a ton of upside just because of the from a trait standpoint. It's all there. Of course, like pass protection, he's going to be a little less experienced in that area because of the
Mhm.
type of offense he played in high school. So that's going to be a work in progress. But when you're looking purely at traits and physical ability, like gift standpoint, Hamer to me has got some stuff just based on the football side purely.
I don't disagree with that. I mean, he's been such an interesting recruiting story because he was listed at 345 pounds in last fall. And I remember he showed up to a game, and Dan Owen, now paid staff writer of gophergazette.com, took a photo of him. And I remember he showed me in the press box, and I looked at him and I said, there ain't no effing way that guy's 345 pounds. because I mean, he came in on his summer splash official visit sub 300. Like, that's where I think the discussion, I mean, why I bring it up is because Minnesota, I don't think has done a good job of developing the 340 plus guy that they bring in. And the only one that I can think of that was really developed there is Daniel Falele, and he is the exception to every rule, which is why he's still playing in the NFL. Now, you could argue Curtis Dunlap, who started a lot of games for multiple Big Ten schools, but I want to get on the guys who are leaner, longer, more athletic, because they need to continue to develop that tackle position. Now, as we switch to the defensive side of the ball house, we
Hmm.
talk about a defensive line class that is, again, five strong as you go here locally from Wyzetta and Eli Diani. You've also got Gage Geyer, the defensive tackle from Edina. You go to the state of California with your guy, Lamani Fajoko from Juniper Sierra, which is San Mateo, California. Cameron Saunders, a five technique from Valley Christian out in San Jose. And then a Russian pass rusher in Roy Price from Newark, Ohio. So when you think about what did Danny Collins and now new defensive line coach CJ Robbins try to do to address what they believe is an ever evolving position here in the Big Ten?
I felt like, being able to toggle guys, whether that's, be able to play at the rush end spot, toggle back off ball. Roy Price is the type of guy that they can move around to a lot of different alignments. They definitely value versatility in that sense. Like Cam Saunders is a guy that can play, the five tech defensive end and maybe slide inside on passing downs. They're looking for guys so they can play multiple defensively because you see flashes of that with what Danny kind of implemented defensively is they want guys that can do a lot of different things, keep it simple for them, but make it complex for the defense to be able to process play to play like what's going on. So I think that has morphed into the front more that they want that type of skill set as they target players. But that kind of was the core big picture takeaway that I had from the group was just versatility.
Yeah, I don't know that I necessarily disagree. I think this is such an interesting mix, especially with someone like Eli Diani, because like we talked about earlier with Furian and Ferreira. I think it's a similar story where he just hasn't played a lot of football. Now the traits are there where Eli is 6'4" plus. He's now 275 pounds. To me, that says he's probably destined for the interior, but
Hmm.
he's coming off back surgery as a teenager. And that to me is a scary proposition because I think about a defensive tackle that's already on the roster who missed the entire year last year because of a back issue. Now, all indications I've heard from him and from different people I've talked to is that he's going to be ready to go this fall. But it's like, what does it look like when he just hasn't played a lot of football? You got a guy like Gage Geyer, who Edina hockey player, which again, one of the best programs in the Midwest that he plays on. Again, he's got athleticism there. I think he is definitely a guy that's got a very high floor. But I think probably my favorite guy is Cameron Saunders, just because finding five technique bodies is so difficult for Minnesota. Like you can see what they look like when it hits at a 100 percentile outcome, like Anthony Smith. Because I'll continue to remind folks, if Anthony Smith has 14 tackles for loss, and last year I think what did he have? How 17 and a half?
Yes.
And he puts another double digit sack season on the record. He's going to become the all-time leader in Gopher football history in both sacks and tackles for loss. Again, he's one of the most powerful players that you'll ever watch in a Gopher uniform on the defensive line. But it's like, okay, the guys after him aren't necessarily ready yet. So you're trying to find the next Anthony Smith at five technique where it's like, well, guess what? Everybody wants a 6'5" guy with great length that they can just add weight to, which is why
Hmm.
when Minnesota made the trade, well, again, they didn't actually make the trade, but this is what I joked to Gopher staffers about behind the scenes is when they made the trade of Anthony Smith left the state of Pennsylvania and was traded to Minnesota, where Penn State then took Davon Townley from Minneapolis North back. I think Minnesota would take that trade every day of the week and twice on Saturdays, the way that that whole thing played out. But you're trying to find guys that are big enough to be able to hold the edge, like Anthony or even someone like Assezi did for so many years under PJ. You need to find the next guy, and that's where I think they have that in Cameron Saunders. You have any other
Yeah,
thoughts on the D line before we go to linebacker?
my favorite player so far in the class is on the D line and Lamani Fehoko.
We'll get to
I
that at
just
the end because I want to save that for the end. We'll get into your
okay,
6'1" spark plug defensive tackle, but
yeah,
at linebacker, Mariano Sori Marin hit on a lot of, I believe, what I like to affectionately call, if I can talk today, Plan A guys. And you've got two from the state of Iowa, which one of the, if you're here for the T, as my wife's trashy videos would tell you on YouTube, that it's interesting the amount of guys that both Minnesota and now Illinois have taken from the state of Iowa in this class that the Hawkeyes didn't move on. Now, it is like a 2016 type of in state class for Iowa, where if you don't know what that reference means, back in 2016 in the state of Minnesota, there was just an absurd amount of players, like way higher than normal. Because on a given year, the state of Minnesota produces probably somewhere between 7 and 9, I would say, power four commits. Now, in the state of Iowa this year, they're almost like 18, 20 deep. It's just a very strange year. And so Iowa has not elected to just load up on everybody. So you're hoping as a Gopher fan that they've screwed this thing up like Tracy Clays did back in the day when he didn't take guys like Coyote Owasika from Maple Grove, who ended up in the NFL. Didn't Tommy Doyle get
yes, Tommy
yeah,
Doyle.
another guy
Well,
that ended up in the NFL that, again, it's that's a whole different discussion for a whole different podcast. But two guys that Minnesota took from the state of Iowa in their linebacker class, Tate Wallace from Iowa City and Kason Claiborne. And I want to start with them before we get to Wyatt Wilbur, which is an outstanding college football name from Maryville, Tennessee. What stands out to you about what Mariano wanted to target there with Tate and Kason? Because I think they're very different players.
yeah, their styles are different. I mean, Wallace is more of like an attacking downhill, real physical type of linebacker, but he's laterally quick and he can work from depth as well or kick down to the edge. He's able to, kind of play off the edge and mug around occasionally, even putting his hand in the dirt at times. So I think there's clearly some versatility there to maybe unlock. Claiborne, I think, has got like the range trait, being able to work potentially in sub package situations just because of his downhill ability. Just really can react and get downhill fast. I think, the versatility again is another thing that I would say stands out. Claiborne's more of like a bursty type of linebacker, but I think,
Yep.
you know, Wallace has got more of that physical dimension. I think those two kind of complement each other and provide a little bit different flavor of linebacker.
Tate Wallace, to me, who is a 4 star for us, is such a different type of linebacker take to me. And I get why Wisconsin targeted him so heavily. At the end there, I mean, Wisconsin was on him quite a bit before Minnesota beat them out because Minnesota had been on him longer. I think the Wallace family really appreciated the amount of effort that Sori Marin put into them long before Wisconsin really, really wanted him. But to me, he's like a 3-4 inside linebacker coming to play in a 4-3
Yeah,
scheme, which I am fascinated to see how it kind of works out because Tate Wall, like if you want to make somewhat of a comparison, which is going to be to someone like Matt Kingsbury. But here's the thing: Tate is taller than Matt Kingsbury is right now. I think he's probably heavier than what he was. Now he's going to have to trim down some, but it's like he's someone like say Jack Sanborn was for Wisconsin, like someone that can really dominate you between the tackles, which Minnesota's had that at times. I think Cody Lindenberg was someone who could do that, but Cody had more sideline to sideline speed. You look at someone like Jack Gibbons. Again, Jack Gibbons is still popping around in the NFL playing a lot of significant snaps. But that's where it's such an interesting mix, or it's like an interesting take within a 4-3 scheme because you're hoping that you don't have to move him down to rush end. But if it hits, it's like, okay, well, you have like a Wisconsin type of back in the mid 2010s where they were just pumping out inside linebackers into the NFL. That to me is what the hit scenario looks like for someone like Tate Wallace.
Yeah, it feels like the arc of the Jim Leonard, inside backer that's versatile. Back in the day, it kind of reminds me of the skill set,
Mhm.
career arc that he could potentially follow long term.
Yeah, Wyatt Wilbur, the other one in this class here that Minnesota found out about. I mean, this is why satellite camps are always so interesting is they found him at a Memphis mega camp. So they went to a satellite camp at the University of Memphis, saw him run, and from my understanding is then Memphis understood that there were Big 10 schools there. So they tried to then pull him out of stuff to like hide him. Minnesota saw enough of him. Then they watched workout clips. Then they watched his tape. Then they got him on campus, found out he's a legitimate 6'4". And we're like, okay, you can really run. You're 6'4". We're going to take you. And so that's where, to me, I think a Wyatt Wilbur type is somewhere, if it works. Again, we want to talk about, ceiling type of scenarios with this guy. Maybe he's the Thomas Rush type. Maybe he's a Cody Lindenberg type, but I know he's 6'4" and he can run house.
Yeah, I feel like he's going to follow the off ball. I do see the potential of kicking down, to play the rush end spot long term, but I think like based on his length and size and like what he can be projecting out, I thought he's really physical while just, deconstructing blocks. I thought that was the big takeaway
Mhm.
watching him play. He's a very physical player. I think, they're looking again, this is another traits projection in terms of like potential options, a couple different paths the player could follow, but like the traits and feel like they'll find a home for him, down the road based on his development and then future depth chart needs.
So let's finish off with the defensive back position, where once again, if you're going to have a 29-person class, you're going to have some big position groups. Defensive back, and there's a reason I'm calling it defensive back and not corner, not nickel, not safety, is because, especially, I think what we've learned here over the last 24, 36 months from Joe Rossi to Corey Heatherman to now Danny Collins is they want to have positional flexibility on the back end so that they can just play the best DBs. And so that's where you've got an eclectic mix of sizes, speeds, strengths, weaknesses. And you've got guys such as Justin Wally's younger brother, Jordan
Hmm.
Wally, the pride of Mississippi, is now going to be a Golden Gopher. He committed back on May 31st from, again, I'm not going to attempt that high school. I'd rather not try to screw something up this late into the podcast. But you've got Jordan Wally, who's 5'9", but he's incredibly fast. You've got someone like Zach Walker from Moorhead, the final Moorhead kid, that is one of the best track athletes in the state, from the 100-meter to the 200-meter to long jump. The size at a legitimate 5'11", and you look at what he's done on the track with, I think, how many 10.5s does he have? Oh, so I'm not sure. Plus, I know he was a state qualifier for the long jump too. Like he's going to be, I think, the most raw of the Moorhead quad, because I think he's probably more of a track athlete than he is a football guy at this point. But you're betting on traits. You've also got a guy like Jai German from Fort Myers, Florida, who was just out at the opening. Again, very, very fast. That's what you're going for. And I think there's more physicality to his game than people give him credit for. You get into the, I would say, more safety nickel position as well. Someone like Wyatt Liebentreit from Omaha, Nebraska, someone that the Huskers did not move on, which I think is fascinating there. A 6'1" safety who's also got a lot of track things going on for him. You've got someone like Taylor Daniels from Seton Hall Prep out in New Jersey. Not the biggest guy in the world at 5'9", but someone that multiple Big Ten teams targeted, including Daniel House's favorite former coordinator, Joe Rossi. They wanted him bad. Here's what I would tell you: if Taylor Daniels wasn't 5'9", he wouldn't be coming to the University of Minnesota, because if he was 6 foot, he'd be a top 100 player with the tape that he has. He is incredibly physical on tape to me, and I think there's a lot of similarities potentially between he and Kerry Brown in that aspect. And then finally, they were able to execute a flip for the little brown jug when Minnesota was able to get Las Vegas Centennials Maxwell Miles flipped to them from the University of Michigan, where he had been committed. The biggest safety or defensive back in this class at almost 6'2". So I know I've said a lot of names. What stands out to you about what Danny Collins is trying to do as these guys continue to get closer to campus?
Well, what I notice is, like you mentioned, different flavors of skill set, in the back end. They want guys that they can mix and match based on the type of scheme they're going to play that specific week. You look at how Minnesota sits back and kind of rolls zones and plays inverted zones. You can read about that on the website. I did a big article on
And
that.
what is the website called and how can people
Go-
get to it?
GophersGuru.com. Check it out. $5 a month. You can get access
I'm
to
so
it.
glad
But
that came up organically. Good job, House.
multiple, coverage types, guys that have, the ability to play in different types of zones. That's what you're looking for. And, that's what Danny Collins has clearly prioritized. I mean, safety, Minnesota's done a solid job of identifying safeties that have translated well. And I think now he's continuing to do that where he's like, I want nickels, I want guys that can play inside, outside, all sorts of different stuff. I'd say Jai German, when I watched him play and like kind of thought about it and noodled it in my head, I hate making comparisons,
What
but
do you
he
mean? I'm going
kind
to
of,
hold you to this, and so is all of the thousands of Gopher fans that are listening to this, and we'll never let you forget it. Isn't that right, Hank Epke?
I kind of like, I kind of see a little like Mike Sainer still type of
And
player
for
skill
those
set.
people who don't know that, that is your favorite former Michigan nickel.
Yes. And they have similar body types, like similar styles of play. So that was kind of the one that popped up in my mind when I was watching. I agree with Taylor Daniels, though. I think he can kind of do a lot of different stuff, come around the line of scrimmage, work underneath and roam, plays with good vision on the quarterback. Unique type of player that they can deploy in a lot of different ways, especially when they're in maybe some sub package, unique coverage styles with Danny Collins' defense.
Okay. Interesting. Interesting. Now, I would comment further, but to end off this podcast, I think one of the things that listeners would like to know is all right, guys, you've talked about a lot of these guys. You've at least said the names of 29 different guys. Okay. And I don't know that I see Minnesota necessarily adding a ton more to this class. Again, I understand that the roster limits are very fluid still, somewhere between 105, 110. It's all very fluid. Trust me when I say when I have these conversations with high-ranking Gopher officials, fluidity is the name of the game. And I know that the lovely folks on gophergazette.com love when I use the word fluid, but that's just if I'm being talked to about that, I have to convey it down to you listeners and handsome and lovely subscribers as well. So the final thing that I want us to discuss here is I want us to pick one guy on the offensive side of the ball and the defensive side of the ball that is one of your favorites. Now, I'm not saying this is the best commit. I'm not saying it's the worst commit. I'm saying he's a guy that has piqued your interest for XYZ reason. And he's got these different things going for him that have you excited to say in 2028 or 2029, when he first breaks onto Huntington Bank Stadium's field, know that I was one of the guys first on him. So let's start with one guy on the offensive side of the ball, and you can start.
Oof. I would say David Mack's my guy, the Moorhead receiver. I just think that he's got some natural separation. I watched him in person. I saw him. I just felt like there's something with like how he moves and like the tempo of his routes and how he sets stuff up. I think that there's going to be something there, like you said, to be just a natural separating receiver in the Big Ten. Like he doesn't have that burner speed necessarily at this point, which could be developed and continue to get better in that area. But when you can run routes and get open, uh, I see something there.
All right. I mean, I've already waxed poetically about David Mack on this podcast already, so I get that one. I was going to pick a receiver, but I don't want to double down on the receiver position. I've already talked about why I'm so high on Brooks Baco as well. Um, boy, I guess you know what? Screw it. I'm going to stick to the receiver position and talk about Carlos Ferguson, who I think definitely has four-star ability when he is legitimately 6'4". He can, as you put on the tape, he runs incredibly well for his size, and I think he can get out of. If I'm going to be putting on my Isaac Frichte hat, his break points, aka when he gets out of his route, Some guys that size struggle to do so with change of direction stuff. I think for his size, that is going to be an asset for him. And I think about guys that can go up and win 50-50 balls. It's an area that Minnesota has struggled in for years now, essentially since we saw a younger, healthier Chris Ottman Bell. Like Chris Ottman Bell didn't have the size that Carlos Ferguson has, but it's going to be one thing where I want to see Minnesota have a develop a high school receiver that has that size and that also can kind of take the top off the defense at that type of size, be able to help you. And so that's where I'm going to go with Carlos Ferguson. Now, as we go to the defensive side of the ball, I want you to sell me on your new favorite defensive tackle, who I think you have already compared in the back of my mind to Steven Richardson. But go
Oh,
on about your favorite 6'1" defensive tackle from California.
I like Lamani Fehoko. I thought he was a good two-way player. I mean, I thought his guard tape was great as well. I think he's really good at like bending, sinking, anchoring, just in that tape, but then also looking at like how he's able to really fire off the balls, the DT, shed blocks, and then like when he gets to the top of the rush, he's able to really kind of bend and finish the rush. I think that's something that really stood out when I watched him, like his balance and how he moves, and I think he's got some potential to be one of the surprises of the class. Like I'm willing to put a good bet on him for the future.
So I'm going to also stick with an undersized guy at the position, and that's where I talked about him a little bit already, but I'm going to go with Seton Hall Prep's Taylor Daniels. I just cannot get over in my mind, and this is where you kind of put yourself into a hole. And I know that I'm the only one doing this house, but I just see so much of Kerry Brown in Taylor Daniels' tape, where you look at a 5'9" guy who just flies around and is completely fearless on the back end. To me, that's the type of guy that you put on special teams immediately, especially now in this 5-for-5 era. Let him get his feet wet, and then you find room for him at nickel. You find room for him at strong safety. Kerry Brown's not going to be here forever. He's only got 2 more years of tape. And that's where it's going to be for me. Taylor Daniels, like I said, I think if he was a couple inches taller, I don't know that he'd necessarily be coming to the University of Minnesota. I'm okay with him only being 5'9", 5'10", because
Hmm.
that dude plays incredibly hard. He flies around. He knows how to track the ball. And it wouldn't shock me at all come 28, 29 that you see Taylor Daniels roaming out there thinking, and you're watching him out at Huntington Bank Stadium thinking, boy, there's a lot of Kerry Brown in that type of game. So, all right, House, before we get out of here, do you have anything else you want to tell the lovely, lovely listeners?
No, just lots of content on the website, getting ready for the season. Just did a breakdown on some of the coverage stuff Minnesota did last year. Breakdowns on all the guys that we talked about today, going into the weeds, kind of a
Mhm.
expanded version of what we just talked about on the podcast. So, just getting ready for football season. It's almost here. I'm like, gosh, I'm just ready for games to be played now, and we got to wait another like 60 days.
Well, we're at least in July, which means internal media days 3 weeks away. I will
Yep.
be in Chicago for Big Ten media days in 4 weeks, which means in 5 weeks, fall camp is here and all the theoreticals. And we finally just get to talk about football again. So that's where I'll make one last shameless plug here. Gophergazette.com is the same thing that you were used to hearing about. It's Minnesota 24/7. Dan Owen has got an exclusive one-on-one with Don Plitzaway on the women's basketball side of things. Ryan James has an exclusive Nico Medved one-on-one talking all things about transfers. I was able to get Derek Burns from Dinkytown Athletes to go on the record talking about shell companies and NIL. He takes some shots at Nick Saban and what he's been saying. Like, hey man, if you want to hear about what's actually going on and what does the Protect College Sports Act mean for the University of Minnesota, there is no one better and who knows it better than Derek Burns. Plus, we've got so much more coming in the pipeline. 75% off for new annual subscribers at gophergazette.com. But if you're watching us on YouTube, thank you for looking at our faces for radio, at least for me. But we will talk to you guys soon, and go Gophers.